No cameras, no reporters, no highlight reels waiting to be clipped and posted. What happened inside that gym was never meant to leave the room. And yet, weeks later, people across women's basketball are still whispering about the same thing. Not a box score, not a stat line, a moment. The kind that shifts power without asking permission. Because when something breaks the natural order, the silence afterward is louder than any crowd. Here's the part that has everyone uneasy. This wasn't a game. It wasn't even a public scrimmage. It was a closed Team USA practice during Olympic preparation, the most protected environment in the sport. Phones collected, doors locked, legends everywhere. And yet, according to multiple reports and growing online buzz, something unfolded that didn't fit the script. Something that made people who've controlled this game for decades stop, stare, and recalibrate in real time. What's important to understand right away is that this story isn't really about a single shot or a flashy sequence. It's about hierarchy, about how power is supposed to move slowly in women's basketball, handed down with care, respect, and timing. Veterans lead, young stars wait. Everyone knows the rules, or at least they did, until someone walked into that practice and allegedly ignored them completely. For weeks, fans have been sensing it. The shift in tone during interviews, the careful wording from veterans who usually speak freely, the sudden change in how Caitlin Clark was being discussed, not as a future star, but as a problem nobody seemed ready to address out loud. People started connecting dots between Olympic camp decisions, media narratives, and the way insiders avoided direct answers. At the time, it felt like overthinking. Now, it feels like foreshadowing. Because if the reports are even partially accurate, what happened in that gym wasn't a moment of growth or a learning experience. It was a disruption, the kind that doesn't wait its turn, the kind that doesn't ask to be acknowledged. And when the dust settled, one of the most composed figures in basketball history allegedly said 4 quiet words that instantly took on a life of their own. Not in celebration, not in anger, in recognition. We're stepping into rumor territory here, and that matters. Nothing about this was meant for public consumption, but stories like this don't spread unless they hit a nerve, especially not in circles this tight, especially not when the people involved have every reason to keep things quiet. That's what makes this different. That's what makes it uncomfortable. And that's why, whether this played out exactly as described or not, the reaction to it has been very real. Because once a story like this starts leaking, control disappears. And from that point on, the game isn't just being played on the court anymore.
Team USA practices aren't just workouts. They're controlled environments where nothing happens by accident. Every drill is planned, every matchup is intentional, and every detail, down to who's allowed in the building, is locked down for a reason. This is where Olympic rosters are shaped, where chemistry is tested, and where the internal hierarchy of women's basketball quietly reinforces itself. What happens in these gyms is supposed to stay there. That's why this particular practice already mattered before anything unusual allegedly occurred. It wasn't open. There were no cameras rolling for promotional content, no reporters lining the baseline. Phones were reportedly collected, standard protocol for high-level national team sessions. The doors were closed not just to protect strategy, but to protect order. Because inside those practices, legends don't just prepare to win medals, they protect legacy. These sessions are where veterans assert control without saying a word, where tone is set early, where younger players are tested, not just for skill, but for obedience to the unspoken rules. You don't overstep. You don't demand touches. You don't try to steal the moment. You show respect. You absorb knowledge, and you wait. That's how it's always worked. That's how balance is maintained. And that's what makes the rumors surrounding this practice so explosive. Because if what's been circulating is accurate, this wasn't a routine scrimmage or a simple tune-up before international play. It became something else entirely, a measuring stick, not for readiness, but for control. Veterans weren't just evaluating basketball ability, they were gauging whether the next generation understood its place. The timing matters too. Olympic preparation is when stakes are highest and patience is lowest. There's no room for ego clashes or uncertainty. Every rep is about trust. That's why anyone stepping into that environment is expected to blend in, not stand out, to contribute, not dominate, to fit into a system that's been built and protected for years. Caitlin Clark's presence in that gym, according to reports, wasn't supposed to disrupt anything. On paper, she was a guest, a talent under evaluation, someone there to gain experience, not claim authority. The kind of player you watch closely, but don't yet center. And that assumption is what made this practice different from the moment the ball went up. Because once expectations are set, breaking them becomes unforgettable. And if the whispers are true, this practice didn't just bend the usual rules, it exposed how fragile they really were. And that realization didn't come from a meeting or a memo. It came from what happened next on the floor.
Leading into that practice, Caitlin Clark occupied a strange, almost uncomfortable space in women's basketball. Publicly, she was being praised. Her talent was undeniable. Her popularity was impossible to ignore. But beneath the compliments, there was a clear ceiling being implied. The message wasn't hostile, but it was firm. She was special, just not yet. The future, not the present. The star who would take over one day, as long as she waited her turn. That framing showed up everywhere, in interviews where veterans spoke carefully, choosing their words like chess moves, in commentary that emphasized growth over dominance, adjustment over impact. Even when her name came up, it was often followed by reminders about experience, system fit, and learning curves. None of it sounded critical, but all of it reinforced the same idea: power wasn't available yet. At the same time, fans were seeing something completely different. Packed arenas, rating spikes, defenses warping around her before she crossed half court. There was a growing disconnect between how the game was being discussed at the top and how it was being felt on the floor. And that disconnect made people uneasy because it suggested the usual timelines might not apply anymore. Inside the league, that kind of popularity creates tension, not because veterans fear competition, but because attention changes leverage. When a player commands the spotlight that early, control becomes harder to maintain. Narratives move faster, expectations shift, and suddenly the careful balance between respect and relevance starts to wobble. According to reports, that's the context Caitlin Clark walked into, not as a challenger being welcomed and not as an outsider being dismissed, but as an unresolved question. Could she dominate without disrupting? Could she fit without forcing change? Could she be exceptional while staying quiet? Those weren't just basketball questions, they were political ones. And that's why this practice mattered more for her than almost anyone else on the floor. It wasn't about proving she belonged in the gym, that was already obvious. It was about whether she would accept the invisible boundaries that came with it, boundaries that generations before her had learned to navigate carefully. Because the moment someone crosses that line too early, intentionally or not, the conversation stops being about potential. It becomes about control. And if the stories are to be believed, that line didn't just get crossed, it disappeared. According to accounts from people who claim they were close to the situation, the first shift didn't announce itself with noise or celebration. It was quiet, subtle, the kind of change you feel before you can explain it. The scrimmage setup was routine on the surface. Veterans on one side, younger players on the other. Half-court, controlled pace, the kind of run designed to reinforce structure, not invite chaos. Early possessions went exactly how everyone expected. The veterans moved the ball with purpose. Spacing was crisp. Communication was constant. It was the unspoken reminder that experience still ruled the room. Caitlin Clark, when she first checked in, didn't demand anything. No heat checks, no immediate statements. If anything, that made people relax. But then, something started to feel off. On her first few possessions, according to reports, Clark wasn't hunting shots. She was reading everything. Where help came from, how early defenders shaded,
Who talked on switches and who hesitated? It wasn't flashy, but it was sharp. The kind of awareness that doesn't belong to someone who's supposed to be absorbing, not directing. The first real pause in the gym didn't come from a made basket. It came from a reaction. A defender stepping up 2 beats too early, another one drifting toward the logo when she didn't even have the ball. Space started collapsing in ways that didn't match the action. The defense was responding to threat before it fully materialized. That's when people reportedly began exchanging looks, not coaches shouting or veterans barking orders, just brief glances, raised eyebrows, the recognition that something was tilting even if nobody wanted to say it yet. When Clark finally did touch the ball with intent, it wasn't rushed. One dribble, a slight hesitation, the defense reacted hard, too hard. Lanes opened that weren't supposed to exist. Teammates benefited without even realizing why. And suddenly, the offense wasn't running a set anymore. It was orbiting around gravity.
Still no celebration, no audible reaction, just an unfamiliar quiet settling over the gym. The kind that shows up when confidence meets uncertainty for the first time. Because up until that point, everything was happening within the margins, manageable, explainable. And then, according to the whispers, came the possession that changed the temperature completely. By the time it happened, the gym already felt different, not louder, tighter. According to people who've talked about it since, there was a sense that everyone was waiting for something to snap into focus, even if they didn't know what it would be. The possession didn't start dramatically. No isolation call, no clear out, just the ball swinging, a defender stepping up, and Caitlin Clark receiving it farther from the basket than most players would even consider a threat. That's what made the moment hit so hard. The hesitation was barely there, just enough to freeze the defender. One controlled step back, not rushed, not forced, and then the release. Clean, high, confident in a way that didn't ask for approval. The kind of shot that tells you the decision was made before the defense even reacted. According to reports, the ball went in without touching anything but net. No bounce, no rattle, just a sound that cut through the gym and left nothing behind it. The reaction wasn't cheers, it wasn't gasps, it was silence. The kind of silence that feels heavier than noise, because it means everyone just recalculated at the same time. Heads turned, not toward the basket, but toward each other. Veterans who'd seen everything the game had to offer suddenly weren't sure where to place this, because it wasn't a lucky make, it wasn't a heat check, it was a statement wrapped in simplicity. What stood out most, according to those accounts, was where the eyes went next, not to Caitlin Clark, to the sideline, to Sue Bird. Because in rooms like this, reactions flow from the top, and if anyone was going to signal how this moment should be understood, it was her. Bird didn't clap, she didn't smile, she didn't shake her head or say a word. She just watched, arms folded, expression unreadable. And that, more than the shot itself, is what made people uneasy. Because veterans know when something deserves acknowledgement, and they know when something demands reassessment. From that point on, the energy shifted completely. Defenders pressed higher, help came sooner, the margin for error disappeared. What had started as a controlled run now felt like a test nobody had agreed to take, and the quiet realization began to settle in that this wasn't about confidence anymore, it was about authority. In moments like this, veterans don't react the way fans expect them to. They don't celebrate, they don't argue, they observe. And according to the stories that have circulated since, Sue Bird did exactly that. She stayed still, arms folded, eyes locked, watching not just the ball, but the responses around it, the defenders, the spacing, the way the floor tilted without anyone saying a word. That's why what allegedly came next mattered so much. Reports claim that Bird turned briefly toward Diana Taurasi, just long enough for a few people nearby to notice her lips move. No announcement, no dramatic pause, just a quiet acknowledgement, delivered the way veterans speak when they've reached a conclusion they can't unsee.
The phrase that's been repeated since, always with a disclaimer, always framed as something overheard, was simple. She's different. Not good, not talented, different. And in basketball culture, that distinction carries weight. Good fits into systems. Different forces systems to adapt. It's the word reserved for players who don't just succeed within the game as it exists, but stretch it into something unfamiliar. According to those who were watching closely, that's what Bird recognized in that moment. There was no visible frustration, no sense of threat. If anything, the reaction was closer to clarity, the understanding that this wasn't about competition in the traditional sense. It was about transition happening faster than expected. And transitions, especially unplanned ones, make people uncomfortable. What made the moment even heavier was Bird's restraint. She didn't stop the run. She didn't step in to slow things down. She let it continue. That choice alone sent a message, because when someone with her resume stays silent, it's rarely accidental. Silence in those rooms is its own form of communication. From that point forward, the dynamic shifted again. Defenders didn't just defend harder, they defended differently. Angles changed, pressure increased. The respect that usually arrives years into a career seemed to accelerate in real time, not because anyone wanted it to, but because it couldn't be avoided. And that recognition, quiet as it may have been, set the stage for what came next. Because once a legend acknowledges a disruption, the next question becomes unavoidable. What do you do about it?
If the earlier possessions created tension, this is where it allegedly turned personal. Not emotional, not hostile, personal in the way only elite competition can be. According to accounts from people who've spoken about it quietly since, the run didn't reset the way it usually would. There was no coach stepping in to slow things down, no break in rhythm. The floor stayed live, and everyone understood that something had shifted from evaluation to response. This was the moment when the veterans stopped reacting and started engaging. The matchup tightened. Pressure picked up the moment Clark crossed half court. Switches came faster. Help defenders shaded earlier, almost daring her to make the same decision twice. The message wasn't spoken, but it was clear. If you're going to take space, you're going to earn every inch of it. And according to the rumors, she did. What stood out wasn't aggression, it was composure. Clark didn't rush. She didn't try to overpower anyone or force the moment to grow bigger than it already was. Instead, she slowed everything down, read the defender, read the help, let the possession breathe. That calm, more than anything else, unsettled people because it looked familiar. Veterans recognized it immediately. The cadence, the pacing, the way she used her shoulders and eyes to move defenders before the ball ever moved. It wasn't random creativity, it was studied. And then, allegedly, she took it a step further. According to those accounts, Clark mirrored a move that's been part of Sue Bird's game for years. The hesitation, the slight pause that forces defenders to lean just enough to lose balance. But instead of finishing where Bird traditionally would, Clark drifted back, further than expected, further than comfortable. The shot went up from a place on the floor that usually signals a bad decision, but the release didn't match that assumption. It was controlled, balanced, certain. And when it dropped, the reaction wasn't disbelief anymore, it was understanding. Sue Bird, according to multiple retellings, didn't even track the ball. She leaned back slightly, eyes lifting toward the ceiling, and let out a laugh that didn't sound amused. It sounded resigned. The kind of laugh you make when something you've sensed finally becomes undeniable. Around them, the responses told the rest of the story. No trash talk, no protests, just players stepping back, hands on hips, staring at the floor or the scoreboard that wasn't even running. Because in that moment, the confrontation wasn't about winning a possession, it was about witnessing the overlap between eras. And once that overlap becomes visible, there's no going back to pretending it isn't happening.
What happened on the court was one thing. What allegedly happened after is what truly unsettled people. Because according to multiple reports, none of this was ever supposed to exist outside that gym. No clips, no receipts, no proof, just memory and mutual silence. That's how moments like this usually survive, if they survive at all. But then came the leak. It's been said that a short video, roughly half a minute long, began circulating quietly in private basketball circles. Not posted, not shared publicly, sent directly. Former players, coaches, insiders, people who understand what they're looking at without needing commentary. The footage, according to those descriptions, was grainy. No audio, just visuals. Caitlin Clark hitting deep shots while some of the most recognizable figures in the sport stood frozen. The reaction wasn't excitement, it was fear. Because insiders knew immediately what that kind of footage represented. Not just dominance, but loss of narrative control. Team USA practices are protected precisely because they preserve hierarchy. They allow veterans to manage transitions privately. Once something like that escapes, even in fragments, it accelerates timelines that were never meant to move that fast. Within hours, according to speculation, the clip had been discussed in group chats that rarely agree on anything, and the tone was consistent. This wasn't about embarrassing anyone, it was about what happens if fans see what insiders just saw. Because once that door opens, there's no way to slow the conversation back down.
Then, reportedly, the footage made its way onto social media. Not in full, not cleanly, just enough to raise questions. A few seconds here, a reaction shot there, enough for fans to start connecting dots that had already been forming. The body language, the silence, the expressions that didn't match a routine practice. And that's when the real anxiety set in. Because leagues aren't just built on competition, they're built on pacing, on deciding when stars rise and how narratives are framed. A leak like this doesn't just challenge talent evaluations, it challenges authority. It invites the public into a room they're never supposed to enter. Suddenly, people weren't asking if Caitlin Clark was ready, they were asking why she wasn't being centered already. Why veterans were speaking more cautiously, why media language shifted almost overnight. And once fans start asking those questions, answers become optional. That's why, according to people close to the situation, the footage wasn't discussed openly. No confirmations, no denials, just quiet adjustments. Because acknowledging it would legitimize it, and pretending it didn't exist became harder by the day. What terrified insiders wasn't the clip itself, it was the precedent. The realization that moments meant to be contained could now escape. And once that happens, the balance between legacy and future doesn't get negotiated anymore. It gets decided in public. After the practice, nothing exploded publicly. There were no statements, no clarifications, no emergency press conferences. And that, according to people who pay attention to these dynamics, is exactly how you know something mattered. When institutions feel truly shaken, they don't react loudly, they adjust quietly. In the days that followed, fans began noticing subtle changes. Not anything you could point to in a headline, but shifts in language. Veterans started talking less about timelines and more about evolution. Phrases like "earning your spot" quietly gave way to "the game is changing." Interviews sounded more careful, more reflective, as if everyone was suddenly aware that the ground beneath them wasn't as solid as it once felt. Behind the scenes, according to reports and ongoing speculation, conversations were happening that rarely need to happen at this level. Long ones, private ones, the kind that don't produce quotes but do produce decisions. It's been said that key figures within Team USA began rethinking how development actually works when a player accelerates faster than the system allows for. If those reports are accurate, the conclusion was uncomfortable but unavoidable. Traditional timelines only work when everyone agrees to follow them, and once someone proves they don't need to, the structure has to bend. What made the situation even striking was Caitlin Clark's response, or lack of one. No cryptic posts, no subtle celebrations, no attempt to shape the narrative in her favor. She said nothing, and in doing so, she let everyone else do the talking for her. That silence, according to people familiar with power dynamics in sports, was strategic, whether intentional or not. It forced others to react without being provoked. From the outside, it looked like business as usual. Practices continued, rosters evolved, games were played. But inside the league, the center of gravity had shifted. Younger players were being discussed differently. Veterans were being framed more as mentors than gatekeepers, and the future, once comfortably distant, suddenly felt very close. No one publicly traced those changes back to a single practice. No one had to, because moments like that don't need official acknowledgement to have impact. They live in the way decisions get made afterward. And once that shift happens, it doesn't reverse. It only spreads.
So here's the question that refuses to go away. Did everything happen exactly the way it's been described? Did that practice unfold beat for beat as the stories claim? Or has the truth grown larger in the retelling, shaped by fragments of footage, secondhand accounts, and a fan base ready to believe that a line was crossed behind closed doors? The honest answer is that we may never know. And in a strange way, that might not even matter, because something clearly changed during that stretch of Olympic preparation. You can see it in the way conversations shifted, in the way veterans chose their words, in the way executives stopped talking about the future as if it were far away. Whether the leaked clip shows everything or only hints at it, the reaction to it was real, and reactions don't happen without cause. Legends don't recalibrate unless they feel something move beneath them. Institutions don't quietly adjust unless the old assumptions stop holding up. And players don't get framed differently overnight unless the people in power have seen something they can't unsee. That's why this story has lingered, not because of a viral moment, but because of what it suggested. When Sue Bird allegedly said those 4 words, "She broke everything," it wasn't about disrespect, it wasn't about ego. It was about recognition, the understanding that systems built to control timing don't work when talent accelerates faster than tradition allows. Sometimes the torch doesn't get passed gently. Sometimes it gets taken. Whether that realization came from one shot, one sequence, or an accumulation of moments doesn't change the outcome. The game is evolving. The balance between legacy and future is being renegotiated in real time. And Caitlin Clark sits at the center of that shift, not because she demanded it, but because her presence made it unavoidable. Maybe the clip doesn't tell the full story. Maybe the legend has grown larger than the footage itself. But legends don't form out of nothing. They form when enough people see the same crack at the same time. And now the only question left is what happens next. Because once everything breaks, it never goes back together the same way again.